company is over 60 years old. It's going back 3 generations, and obviously you've entered into the legacy. So I'd just like to know how that legacy has shaped your mindset now that you're stepping into leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're actually a 3rd generation family business in Columbus, Ohio. And it's actually my wife's side of the family. Her grandfather, Paul Sharfin, was a superintendent in Brooklyn. He actually got an assignment way back in the day to come build a post office in Columbus, Ohio. And he used to joke that he had to pull up a map and figure out where Columbus, Ohio is, because he spent his whole life in New York. And, you know, the very quick version is he moved to Columbus, Ohio to do a project. One thing led to another. And, you know, he was just a superintendent, you know, employee for a larger firm out of New York at the time. One thing led to another. Columbus, Ohio is kind of a nothing town in the Midwest. Him and his wife, Myra, fell in love with it, planted roots, and, you know, 60 something years later, we're all still here and descendants of that original move. And that post office is still in downtown Columbus today. It's always a special drive by it and, you know, tell people that's why we're here.
Nice. So basically your company started with a commercial project 60 years ago.
Yep. And they ended up opening their own shop, M&P for Myra and Paul. That was their name, construction. And they were just your traditional general contractor doing local work, union work. Ohio State is obviously very prevalent in Columbus. So a lot of projects for the university. They did restaurants and retail. Just if you know, close your eyes and think of what is a general contractor in my local town, that was them. Small mom and pop, you know, handshakes and relationships and the good old days. And so the business has obviously evolved over the decades. And, you know, so then the 2nd generation is Joel and Phyllis, who are actually my in-laws, my wife's parents. They were in their, probably their mid 20s. They were in the New York and New Jersey area, no construction background at all. They were actually went to business school and were working for Macy's corporate in their buyer program. And I think they were home for the holidays and had a conversation with the parents about, you know, legacy and the next generation of the business. And I think my father-in-law said, I know nothing about construction, I sell clothes. And I think Paul, you know, his father-in-law at the time said, don't worry, you'll learn. And they made the jump. And I think within a week, my mother-in-law quit her job and moved back home to Columbus, and they were in the family business.
Nice. So how did you get into it? I mean,
Yeah, a lot of steps in between then and now. So that must have been, I lose track of the dates, but, you know, 30 something years ago. They were in the business. It continued to evolve over the decades to traditional general contracting. They built restaurants and retail, kind of the same thing as, you know, the 1st generation was doing. And skipping a lot of steps in between, about 20 years ago, my father-in-law was asked to build a hotel here in Columbus. And so he builds a hotel, and one thing leads to another. And you'll find that developers who own hotels usually own more than one. And they usually are not in the same city or let alone state. And so he did a good job on the first project. And they said, you know, hey, we own another hotel in, I believe it was Rochester, New York. It needs a renovation. Would you come do it? And he said, how am I going to do that? I live and work in Columbus, Ohio. And, you know, he figured it out and shipped guys up to New York and did that project. And one thing led to another. And, you know, for the last 20 years, we've built our business around that model, is doing specifically hotel renovations. And we travel just about anywhere in the country. I think we've worked in 30 something states.
Nice. So how did you meet your now wife? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah. So I grew up in Chicago. I don't think I'd ever been to Ohio. And I went to Indiana University, and my junior year, I studied abroad in Italy, specifically in Rome. She grew up in Ohio, went to college out in Arizona, also chose to study abroad in Rome. And we actually met on that exchange program for about 6 months, junior year of college. So she called up her friends and family at home and said, you know, I met this great guy in Italy. And they said, well, what part of Italy is he from? And she said, Chicago. And we kind of started dating as soon as we got back from Rome, and have been together ever since.
So you're not coming from a construction background. You kind of married into it.
Quite, if you think about a construction background, I probably come from as furthest opposite as you can imagine. I would say if you would have asked my closest friends or family if you ever saw Kory working in construction, they would be on the floor laughing. I think my level of construction expertise is, maybe changing a light bulb or hanging a crooked piece of art on the wall. So yeah, but the version of how I got into the business is I went to business school. I got my working at a Fortune 15 healthcare company, specifically in sales and sales leadership, and was quickly working my way. What I thought was going to be my career path is climbing the corporate ladder. I had a lot of great mentors and bosses along the way, who really shaped, I think, the professional that I became at a young age, leading by example and leading from the front. And we can go into that more if you want. But I was on a really successful corporate track. We were home for the holidays and having a conversation with her parents. And, I think the part about corporate America that it just never felt right to me. I learned sort of how to play the game, so to speak, but there's a lot of politics. There's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of layers. It's a great place to start your career and get training that you can't get anywhere else. I mean, they have training programs and development. And if you want to be on a leadership track, which is what I wanted to do, they were supportive of that. So I have nothing bad to say about my experience there. They did nothing but promote me and give me great opportunities. I just felt in my gut, I was meant to do something a little bit more entrepreneurial, a little bit smaller, somewhere less formal, where you can just say what you mean and get things done and move the ball forward. I was looking. It honestly didn't even occur to me that my wife's family business was a possibility. As crazy as that sounds, it was kind of right under my nose the whole time. And I was talking with startups. My wife went to work at a startup in Columbus. I thought I was going to jump from a corporate job to more of a startup thing in Columbus. And, it just hit me one day that, we should talk with her parents about what their plans are for the generation and legacy. And we had a conversation. We went to lunch, the four of us, and I think it kind of shocked them that we were interested in the business, and they were immediately excited. But then I also think they were immediately like, this was never the plan. I think they thought they'd work, as long as they wanted to, and they'd, either sell the business or close up shop and retire. I don't think they ever had thoughts of a third generation, because they knew that both Blair, my wife, and I were in business, but they just thought we'd be on a corporate track and not, coming into the construction world.
Wow, that's super interesting. So before I forget, what's the prospects looking like for a fourth generation now?
Well, we have a 2-year-old named Polly, who's actually named after Paul Sharfin, who was the original founder who moved from New York, my wife's grandfather. Really special. He was, you close your eyes and picture what you want your grandfather to be. That is him. Just salt of the earth, most loving, funny. He and I quickly had a quick bond, and he used to joke with my wife that if she and I ever broke up, he was losing her and keeping me. It was that kind of, grandson bond that he has a bunch of granddaughters, and I was kind of his grandson. So we have a 2-year-old, and we actually have one on the way in a couple months, and we'll see. The 2-year-old showing signs of certainly a strong personality. So it wouldn't surprise me if she ends up in business.
So can you tell me a little bit more about Paul? I guess you call him Grandpa, right? He was like a grandfather to you.
Yeah, he really was. I wish we had more time to spend together. He passed away a couple years ago, but just how would I describe him? You meet him, and he never knew a stranger. He welcomed you in with open arms. it was just a really, really special relationship. Actually, when I got into the business, he was around long enough to see me come into the business, but not long enough to see the evolution and the growth of the business, which I think he would be really excited and proud to have seen. But in the early days of joining the business, I used to go to the office, and then, well, on a side note, he, in his later stages, he had Lewy body dementia and some other health issues. So it was kind of a rapid decline once it happened. So every moment to spend with him was special, but he would have me come to his house after work, and after the office, I'd go to his house, and we would sit down, and he'd roll out, a big blueprint set of plans on the kitchen table, and, teach me how to read things. And, it was one of those things that it was just fun. I mean, you're just thinking, this is a great memory, talking about business. And obviously he started the company, so it's very special for him to see his son-in-law and then his, grandson-in-law continuing on his legacy.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So I wanted to mention too, last week, it didn't work out for us to do the podcast because you were in Alaska. So I wanted to make sure to ask you about that. It was Anchorage, right? So
Yeah.
what in the world were you doing in Alaska for
Okay.
work?
Yeah. So the company evolved from being local general contracting work in Columbus, Ohio, to traveling the country. I think we've renovated hotels in 36 states or so. And I had an opportunity about a year ago with a new client, a pretty large, reputable firm that I had been trying to get our foot in the door with for quite some time, and finally had an opportunity to get in front of them. And, at first they weren't really, never heard of you guys, never worked together, and as the conversation progressed, he's like, well, you said you'd work anywhere, right? And I was like, yeah, we traveled the country. And he goes, how about Anchorage, Alaska? And I laughed, like right in his face, like obviously he's not serious. And he's like, no, I'm serious. We own a Marriott there. Would you do it? I immediately, my personality is to say yes and then figure it out after. So I said yes. We're interested in looking at the project for you. And I hung up and walked down the hall to my father-in-law, and I was like, what do you think about working in Anchorage, Alaska? He laughed, obviously said no way. And I was like, well, let's see if we could figure it out. And one thing led to another, and we put together a team and went up to Anchorage, Alaska, dealt with a lot of logistical hurdles and nightmares. But once we got everyone there, it's no different than, what we do day in and day out is renovate hotels.
Mm-hmm. So how far along is that project?
So we actually finished one, and they're looking at buying a second one, which is
Mm-hmm.
the reason for my visit. So they're like, you did it once, what do you think about doing it again? And it's like, well, let's do it.
Yeah, well, repeat customers, that's a good sign for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So obviously you guys you're traveling, you're bringing like your whole crew over. So I definitely want to ask you about that. So what's that kind of culture like? I don't know what you'd call it, like a road warrior culture, but you guys are traveling obviously by plane sometimes. Are you traveling by bus as well?
Yeah. So that's the evolution of our business model, is going from traditional general contractor to, building a restaurant or something in your town to working all over the country. We've really evolved over the last, it's probably been about a decade, but really in the last 5 or 7 years, to really build a strong stable to be able to travel and do work and do it well. And the way we've set that up is, road warriors, to your point, the way Access is structured is we have our office in Columbus, Ohio, and then we have traveling superintendents that are full-time W-2 employees of ours. Those are what I would refer to, or as you mentioned, the road warriors. Those guys will actually move for a temporary basis, a 2 to 4 month period to whatever city and state that project is in, and they'll oversee it on site as the quarterback from day one to the end of the day until the project is complete. And then with them, we bring traveling crews. And I think that's what you were getting at. And yes, they drive, they fly, We figured out how to get them, how to get materials to wherever we're going. And that's really why we've evolved the business into being hotels, and specifically hotel renovations. It's a niche business within construction that most people don't think about, but it's our bread and butter, and we try to do nothing else besides hotels and specifically renovations.
Yeah, you got a pretty committed team by the by the sounds of things, and they'd have to be pretty, tight knit to spend that much time together. And obviously, you have to retain these workers, right? So they're high performers, and they're really committed to you guys.
Absolutely. I'm the first person to admit it. The most important person in a construction company is the superintendent. We're a family business. We treat them like family. It's not me. It's not the project managers in the office. Those are the face of our company. They're our best sales reps. They're our best marketing, and they're the ones that have to execute day to day, because obviously we can't be everywhere at once. And we treat those guys, this sounds cliche, but we treat those guys like family. We've had some that are with us, 10, 15, 20 years. Those guys, we could not do what we do without those guys. And we try to take every opportunity that we have to show them how valued they are. Because there is no construction company without superintendents, and specifically a traveling hospitality, company. And I'm sure we'll get into, some of the challenges of working in hospitality and hotels, but, you have to have construction knowledge. You have to have the personality, you have to be able to think on your feet and have great communication skills, and then deal with, a hotel renovation and everything that comes with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we might as well go on the heels of that, because that was one of my questions. Like, what are some of the kind of things that people wouldn't think of that are challenges in your industry? It might look simple from the outside, but it's either underestimated or misunderstood.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is when you think about a hotel renovation. I think most people who aren't in the industry would think, you shut the building down and you bring in a contractor and you go to town, and it's quite the opposite. If you think about a hotel and the nature of how they make money, and the business of hospitality is they call it heads and beds, but you have to rent hotel rooms. Otherwise, there's no revenue. And so the last thing that a hotel wants to do is shut its doors for 3 to 6 months while a renovation comes on. They might not make it, on the other side of that 3 or 6 months. And so what they do is they actually stay operational, and we come in and renovate it while it's open and while they're selling rooms. And that is very much the most difficult and challenging part of what we do. We'll come in to, whatever hotel, in whatever city, we travel there, and let's just picture a hotel in your mind, a 4-story building with, let's say, 100 guest rooms. We'll start at the 4th floor. We'll work that floor kind of top down. So as we're renovating the 4th floor, the hotel is selling 3, 2, and 1, and people are in the lobby. And then as we finish 4, we give that back, and they immediately, within a day or two, start selling those rooms, and now we're on 3, and so on down the building. And so if you think about that, there's a lot of challenges. Nobody wants to be sleeping no one wants to stay at a hotel that's under renovation. Let's just be real. I mean, if you looked online and said we're under renovation, you're probably looking for a different hotel. But that's the nature of the beast. One way that these hotel owners add value to the property is you renovate it, you make it more modern, you change the bathtubs to showers. You change furniture and tile, and you make it cleaner, and you renovate the restaurant, you put in a gym. That's the nature of real estate development, and specifically in hospitality. And so I would say the most difficult part of it is working in an operational hotel where you have to change 100 rooms worth of furniture. You're jackhammering tile and someone is sleeping below you. How do you do that? And it's constant communication with the general manager. And one of the ways, we like to say that, Axis is going to come here for, let's say, 3 months, and we're going to assimilate into your team. We're here to work with you, not against you. And we try to bend over backwards to work around noise hours of when we can make noise and when we can't. We have to constantly communicate with the general manager to let them know that there's deliveries coming, or we have to shut the water off in the building for a certain amount of time. Those are all the complexities and what makes the project difficult. And oftentimes the construction is the most simple part of the project. It's everything else that gets complex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that sounds pretty challenging to jackhammer quietly. I don't know how you pull that off, but you must have some silencers you attach to them.
If we could figure out how to do construction and be invisible and silent,
Yeah.
You're
striving for it anyway.
that would be amazing.
Yeah. So kind of in that same subject of, challenges or bottlenecks, you guys have scaled quite a bit recently, just from our chats. So you're somewhere, you've gone from 10 to 30 million in a pretty short amount of time, after the company being, in business so long. So that obviously comes with its own challenges, right? So right now, what would be some bottlenecks? Like, is it on the talent side? Is it capacity? Is it margins or visibility or something else?
That's a great question. It's a constant push and pull between my father-in-law and I. And I have some funny stories about when I first got into the business and how he helped, bring me in and where it is today, 5 or 6 years later. But it's the chicken or the egg conversation. It's, do you get the right team and then go get the work, or do you get the work and then get the right team? And he and I have a little bit of a disagreement on what the philosophy is there. And I feel pretty strongly that you get the right people on the bus, and then you go get the work. And he, in a more of a conservative mindset, which I see both sides of the conversation, is we have to make sure we have enough work to support the team. And so we've been fortunate, like you said, to double or triple the company, both in terms of revenue and size of, employee size in the last few years. And it's been challenging. We've made a lot of mistakes.
Sorry to interrupt, but is this like no correlation at all with you entering the company in that time frame?
I think I had something to do with it, but it's a team effort. I mean, we have a great team. One of the things that has allowed us to grow is the talent that we've brought on board. I think I mentioned earlier, my level of construction knowledge and expertise is, was this much coming into this world. And I've hired a couple of really, what I call my right hand and my left hand. We have Doug in our office and Misha in our office, which are kind of funny stories of how we brought both of them in. But they're young, they're next generation like we are. I've always kind of had the vision that construction, it's a very old school. You think about who's in construction, it's old, it's antiquated, there's no use of technology. And so just bringing in fresh, kind of a fresh generation that grew up with technology and a different way of going about business, and I brought from my corporate experience, I think has enabled some of our growth. For instance, if we want to take on more projects, we need more superintendents, we need more project managers, we need bigger crews. How do you go find them? And, in my father-in-law's world, it was word of mouth, or someone had to know someone, or you had to meet somebody, refer somebody. And, I think I've opened up some avenues to his perspective of there's ways to use, technology like LinkedIn and recruiters and different platforms like that and websites to bring people in the door. And I've always felt from day one, I've looked around and I was like, the foundations of this are extremely strong. And that's all due to, Paul Sharfin, but then mostly Joel Kingsley in the last 15 years. And I've always felt like these roots are planted and it's just my job to water them. And if I could bring in the right people, I just had a vision that this could grow. Obviously there's been a lot of challenges, a lot of mistakes and things like that along the way of growing pains. But I've always thought if I could bring the right people in the door, we have a great culture. If you gave us an opportunity, whether you're a client, a vendor, subcontractor, or a future employee, I feel very confident that the culture my father-in-law established is a very family, close-knit. People are motivated and they stay with us, and we're loyal and good and competent. Obviously, that goes without saying. So I've always felt I can just add fuel to the fire, and kind of help it with its trajectory. I don't want to take any credit for laying the foundation of the roots. My father-in-law really had a small but solid foundation, and it's been a lot of fun, helping it blossom over the last few years.
Nice. So where do you see it going in the next, I don't know, 3 to 5 years? Like, do you see it expanding in terms of like headcount or the amount of projects you guys are taking on per year, or revenue wise?
I'm very happy with the growth that we've had, and growing too fast. We've grown extremely fast. I think 3x in the last 3 to 4 years. We could talk about COVID when I first started. That was a whole different animal. But post COVID, in our world, hospitality has really rebounded strong, and we've kind of rode that wave and positioned ourselves to grow. I want to make sure that we're being smart as we grow. When we bring someone on board, they have to fit the culture. There's been times where we've hired people just because they look competent or sound competent, and there's been times where they are extremely competent, but they don't fit our culture, and we've had to let them go, because a bad apple really could, in a small company with 20 people, the wrong couple of people can really tarnish the culture and our reputation. That, there's a saying about reputations take a lifetime to build and a moment to break. And those are the kind of people that we've had to get off the bus, so to speak, really fast, even though there's a business case to say, he's a very strong superintendent or whatever the role was. So we're very selective about who we bring on board, because when you join us, like, I look at you like you're joining the family, and you're going to be here a long time, and you're going to work hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but we're going to treat you great, and we're committed to your developments on whatever career path you think that is. And we have a lot of fun as well.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good plan. I think it's completely doable, seeing as how you guys are growing now. Just wanted to finish with a couple of kind of rapid fire questions for you. So can you think of, I might be stumping you here, but could you think of maybe the wildest or craziest project that you ever worked on?
Oh gosh. Several come to mind. Back during COVID, that, I joined the business at the end of 2019. Coming out of corporate America, I think I took a 80% pay cut to come join a family business with my MBA. And my first couple of days, I was still dressing like corporate America. I showed up to the office with, not a suit and tie, but nice clothes and dress shoes. And I asked my father, what am I doing today? And he sends me to a job site, and I'm moving furniture and sweeping a broom. And I come back just filled with dust. And, he's like, you wore the wrong outfit, And so I kind of joke, we traded in suits and ties for jeans and boots. But back during COVID, there were some wild stories. You might remember there was a national story about a cargo ship that sunk in Japan. It was like the largest cargo shipwreck. Well, we had an entire hotel shut down during COVID, completely empty, which is rare. We talked about operational hotels, but back during COVID, the cost benefit analysis of keeping the doors open versus not, it was, to their benefit to just shut down and basically give us the keys and let us renovate. The entire hotel's worth of furniture sunk to the bottom of that ocean in Japan or wherever that was. And so that was fun. A couple more, that come to mind is there was a project recently, and the shower doors for the hotel were all coming from overseas. And and such is the hotel business, when you're importing some of this stuff, there's a lot of things can go wrong when something's coming from Asia. And so you try to time the renovation to have it ready so that, when the stuff shows up, it can go right in. But we have, probably a month goes by where we're ready for shower doors, but they're not there. And then we finally get the call that they're coming. And we're doing everything you can think of to try to temporary solution, and bringing up old furniture and putting a curtain rod with a shower door like you'd have in a dorm room or a gym. And the shower doors are finally here. Everyone's excited. We run down to go get them. The 53-foot semi pulls up, and the truck comes up, and it's apple juice, just containers and containers of apple juice. And you just have to laugh. I mean, it was like, you get that call and you're just like, you can't make it up. I mean, there's countless stories like that in construction. It's kind of that old tale that, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. It's just the nature of our job is, you think you have a plan and you put it on paper and it all looks great. And then on day one, it goes out the window and something's going to happen. We had a hotel recently. We were days from starting the project and the elevator burned down before we got there. And so good luck getting furniture in a 6-story building without an elevator. Those are the kind of things that, when you're living through them, they're not fun, but when you look back, makes a pretty funny story.
Is there any projects that still make you proud to this day? Like something that you worked on and for whatever reason, it's just something that you're proud of?
There's several. The ones that I walk away feeling the most proud are the ones that you have a little bit of nerves or hesitation going into. There's some hotels that we do, if you think of the limited service kind of brands that you see on every roadside, those, I don't want to say they're easy because every job has its own complexities, but those kind of are simple, and we've done 100 of them, and you kind of know exactly what you're getting. Then there's the challenging ones that are, man, like, takes a lot of planning and you're nervous going in, and when you come through it on the other side, it's extremely, extremely rewarding, for a very, several different reasons. There was I have this on a sidebar. We had never worked in California before, and I never understood why. And my father-in-law, he just had certain isms or things in his head that this place is difficult to work, so we don't do it. Nevada, California, places he had never done. And I would say, why? And he would tell me, once I got, 1 or 2 levels deep, and the answer got to, well, just because, or I don't know, or that's how it's always been. That's never really my mindset. I'm always more of a, well, let's look into that. Why don't we figure that out and see if that's possible? And so back to a project I'm proud of, we got a call about doing a project in Santa Barbara, California. So immediately my father-in-law was like, we're gonna have to pass on it. We don't work in California. And I'm sitting there, well, why not? It's difficult to work there. Okay, why? And once you get a couple layers deep, it turns out we actually can work there, and we did. And it turned out, that project specifically, it was challenging, but we got through it. And that project led to what has become a kind of a marquee client that we've done, 4 or 5 projects for in recent years. And you just kind of never know until you take the chance. Same thing with going to Alaska, same thing with going to Nevada. And that's kind of how we've grown.
Nice. So you're myth busting over there.
Yeah, it's funny. When I first started in the company, I came from corporate America, and so you go through rigorous training programs and everything's structured, and you're an employee, but you're tens of thousands of employees. Like, they have systems and processes in place. You go from that one day to jumping into a family business, and you kind of show up and like, what am I going to do here? And my father-in-law is kind of looking at me like, I don't know. And we'll figure it out. And so we spent probably the better part of a year, and I think I drove him nuts. And to backtrack a little bit, as I joined the company, Blair and I weren't even married yet. I think we were just engaged. So I knew my father-in-law, Joel, and my mother-in-law, Phyllis, obviously, but not that well. Like holidays, and we lived out of town, and we would come in town and see them for dinner. And, it wasn't the kind of relationship anywhere near that it is now, which is part of the beauty of a family business. And so the way I learned is I've always just been curious, and a little bit resourceful. And I just pulled up a seat in his office one day. He was giving me a bunch of busy work to do, and I kind of just pulled up a seat and just sat next to him and said, "Do you mind if I ask you some questions?" And he was, to his credit, extremely patient and open. And I just sat in that chair in his office next to him. And I just asked him why, and why do we do it this way? And how do you know this? And what happens in this? And tell me a time you did this. And I just asked him questions to where I think I could see in his head, he's like, man, shut up. But, he answered every question. We walked through it, and it's been kind of amazing because it's evolved to the point where he gave me more and more responsibility. He probably gave me too much responsibility right out of the gate, which, looking back on it, it's like, man, if the roles were reversed, I don't think I would have trusted that kid as soon as he trusted me. But it was interesting because there was a point a couple of years in where it went from me sitting next to him, asking him why this, why that, to the reverse, where he would come to me and say, what do you think about this? Or should we do that? And that's been really cool. I mean, I kind of step back and, I don't want to take that for granted. It's a really special bond working with family, especially a father-son or father-in-law-son relationship. I was telling my wife the other day, he and I were on the road together traveling, and I was like, man, it's like, that saying, the good old days. And I kind of saw it in real time where, like, we're traveling together like it was when we first started. And I was like, I'm living through the good old days with my father, or father-in-law. And these are the times we'll look back and say, do you remember when we did this? Or do you remember when we did that? And so I take it for granted, and we get busy and distracted, but it's a really special thing to work with family. I couldn't think of a better, group of people. Like, who else would you rather work so hard for than your family? Working with your wife, working with your parents. It's really an awesome, awesome thing. And I think Blair and I are really honored to be able to live on the legacy that Paul and Myra started, and have a lot of fun along the way.
So he was a son-in-law to Paul, right? Your father-in-law?
He was.
Okay, so he can relate to you, I guess, in a special way, right? Because it's like two son-in-laws carrying on the tradition.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's not father-son. It's never been father-son. It's always been father-in-law to son-in-law to son-in-law. So yeah, that's kind of unique, because we didn't grow up together. He didn't grow up with him. So the relationship that he and I have built, I mean, honestly, we're like best friends. It's kind of crazy. You go from, your wife's father to being a business partner, but also a dad. It's a really, really special relationship. And, however many more years he's going to work, I'm just trying to really enjoy it. And it's really quality time. It's a special bond. And you really get to know somebody when you work together. And there's a lot of challenges with family business. Don't get me wrong. It's not easy. There's, it's really difficult because you can get into an argument with a business partner, or we can have a disagreement about something, but we might leave the office and be going to dinner with cousins and grandparents and family that night. And one of the cool things that he and I have never talked about, but just have always done naturally, is we just leave it. We leave it on the field, and like never has it become personal or made any kind of personal attacks or insults or any disagreements we have. It's business. We know it's business, and we could go to dinner that night and be father-son. So it's a cool thing.
That's awesome. It's great to hear. I'm sure there's lots of cons that you could get into, but
Yeah.
I won't pressure you on that point.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest difference has been just more of a generational thing. He grew up doing things a certain way, and then welcoming in the next generation who has a different perspective. Because if you were to meet him, the people that know him wouldn't describe him as patient. but I really would, because he's been nothing but patient with me in business, and coming from a kid that literally, you know, I, this is as vulnerable as I could say it. Like I knew nothing about construction, like literally nothing. Um, Again, I think I said earlier, you would laugh if you were like, Kory's gonna work in construction. You'd be like, yeah, right. Um, so not only was I learning a new industry, but I was learning an entirely different culture of corporate America versus family business. So it's been really, really, really cool. Um, you were asking me for a con, you know, there's a lot. It's hard, there's differences. He's at a phase in his life where he's trying to slow down, and I'm at a phase in my life where, he's in his early 60s and I'm in my early 30s. So he's kind of at the capstone of his career. Um, and I'm kind of at the start, or, hitting my stride in mine. And so my growth mindset, I think, is very counter to his conservative mindset. And that's been a push and a pull. Um, my wife and his wife are both in the business. And so there's a family dynamic. Um, and working with your wife, that's a whole different conversation. I live with my wife. We raise a daughter together. We're at home together. We travel together. We go to the office together. It's a lot of time together, and it's really got to be a special person and a special relationship to be able to balance that with. And the term work-life balance, that is not a thing. When you work with your wife, I think you know how this is. You come home and it's not like work didn't come with you. And we try to make time to carve out time for just her and I to work on our personal relationship as husband and wife and not business partner. So she and I wear a lot of different hats together. We're mom and dad, we're husband and wife, we're partners. But who else would you rather do that with,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know all about that dynamic. You know that I work with my wife, but thankfully my wife is very interested in the work that we do. So we're happy to talk about it all the time.
Yeah,
We're not one of those couples that sit and look at their phone during a whole meal at the restaurant. We're always chatting about ideas, and so that's fun when you can share the passion that you have for your work with your spouse. I think that's something I really appreciate.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this must have been a good conversation because we went way over time. So I usually try to just keep it pretty short, but this was really interesting, and I think it's going to be intriguing, to say the least, for people in the construction world who probably know very little about the hotel renovation space. So it's been very insightful to hear even just how you do it, like the logistics of doing one floor at a time. And this has been really interesting.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity. Hospitality it's definitely a niche within construction. It's its whole different animal, and there's a whole kind of ecosystem built around it. So happy to go into more detailed conversation anytime you'd want, or, it's a business I've grown really passionate about and love it. So if I could ever be a resource to you, you just let me know.
Sure, I'd love to have you on in the next phase of your growth. Where can people kind of find you, or maybe there's some hotel owners or people who are getting ready to renovate a hotel that might want to reach out to you? What's the best way?
Yeah, so our company is Access Hospitality Construction. We have a website with a bunch of our portfolio and a background of who we are. You can find me on LinkedIn, Kory Cutler. I think you have all my contact information, and happy to share it. I'm always happy to have a conversation. Especially with young guys starting out in the industry. That's kind of a passion of mine, because I feel an obligation to pay it forward. I had some amazing mentors and kind of people who came before me in my corporate world, who kind of opened doors for me and were always there for me. And if I could ever do the same for the younger generation, and obviously the construction industry is kind of at an interesting inflection point as a whole. I think we need a lot more people to come into it. It's a great industry. It can be an extremely rewarding and profitable industry. And it's necessary. We need people to build things. So even outside of hospitality, it's a really cool industry, and
Yeah.
it's one of those industries that's, you know, all industries are kind of going through a generational change of boomers to millennials, and construction specifically needs a big influx of millennials and Gen Z and to follow to come into it. So
Now you have a great attitude and great philosophy. So I'll be following your journey. Hopefully we can keep in touch as well. And we'll be following your journey with interest online, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
thank you very much.